Like to explain what the octopus is doing in our bathtub? You found him. Where did you find him? Lake Erie. A saltwater animal is in a freshwater lake? No. Lake Erie does not have octopuses, sharks, barracudas, nothing like that. No. What were you planning to do with him? You were going to eat his brain. And why didn't you? Yeah. Octopuses don't have the same kind of brain. Their brains are mostly in their tentacles. Yeah. So where did you really get him? You got him from the zoo, didn't you? Yes, you did. There's nowhere else you could get one. No, you can't keep him as a pet. I need to use the bathtub. You're going to have to take him back. Yes, take him back. Go on. And don't think of it like an exchange program. Don't bring anything back. Zombies. Oh, got a video to do. Hey gang. Hold that thought. Hey gang, Uncle Todd here. We're going back to the beach. Sonny may be gone for a while. He got himself into a mischief. Anyway, our flick tonight is Phantom from 10,000 Leagues, which doesn't make a lot of sense because leagues going down, we don't have 10,000 leagues of ocean depth. Now, obviously, they were trying to tie in with the very popular Voyage, no, not Voyage, Verne novel, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Of course, that title for that film that came out the previous year from this one, and of course the Jules Verne book, was referring to distance traveled underwater, not depth. And there really isn't a phantom in this. But catchy title. It was released by American Releasing Company, which was a early iteration of the more well-known American International Pictures, which of course would give us all those Roger Corman Poe films, the Beach Party films, and the Big Bug-Eyed Monster films. Most interesting is there is a monster in this, and it is played by what's her name? Norma Hansen, one of the few female monster performers in Hollywood. Maybe about the only one. Anyway, we open our flick with that standard, a fisherman running into some unseen trouble. Later, the fisherman's body and his boat wash up on the beach, where our hero, whose name is Ted Baxter. He notices someone looking over the body who runs off when spotted. He goes to look at the body and is himself spotted by someone.
Don't touch that.
William S. Grant, Special Investigator. Department of Defense, Washington. Well, I guess that makes it pretty official.
I guess it does. Anywho, the two men take a gander at the body and see some interesting things about it.
His body is rigid with burns. The boat's charred too, yet there's no sign of fire. We better...
Grant takes over the scene of the death. He does ask Baxter what his business is here and is told Baxter is here to see the famed oceanographer who lives nearby, Dr. King. Well, Grant lets him go, and Baxter arrives at the Dr. King's home, where he meets his lovely daughter Lois and notices something a little strange.
I'm sorry, he's asleep. He went to bed an hour ago.
Oh, I see.
As if that wasn't bad enough, when Baxter insists on seeing Dr. King, another strange occurrence is noticed.
Dad? Dad?
Well, learning he can do nothing further, Baxter leaves. The next morning, while re-examining the boat, Grant comes upon him again and reveals he has learned something.
My friend the beachcomber. Supposing you tell me what your great interest in this thing is, Dr. Stevens.
Yes, it turns out Baxter is actually Ted Stevens, famous oceanographer, who's had some very interesting theories published about heavy water. With that all settled, the men separate again, and we then switch to the office of Dr. King, where we find out his secretary Ethel and assistant George are both spying on him, but not in partnership with each other.
What have you got there, Ethel?
Nothing, just a piece of scrap. I could tell him what you're up to.
You could. But you won't.
I think she got the point. Okay, I know. Sonny's not here to dissuade me from making those kind of jokes. Anyway, Ted Stevens has been nosing around town and has heard these interesting stories. There have been other mysterious deaths like this, all attributed to a phantom. So, Ted gets some scuba gear and investigates on his own. Great jump scare. So, we have some glowing thing in the water, guarded by some kind of sea dragon thingy. Returning to his boat, he gets to shore where he runs into Lois again and dissuades her from going into the water for a swim, and they have a little conversation. Later, he meets Dr. King at his lab, asking for charts about depth and things. After he gets the charts and leaves, Dr. King pulls out Stephen's book, thereby knowing that he is not Baxter as well. He did tell Stevens that he could stop by his house later and to just walk on in. And this leads to a cute misunderstanding between the doctor and Lois.
Oh! Well, at least you might have knocked.
Well, I did. And your father told me to open the door and come in.
He would.
Oh, the 50s, where embarrassing misunderstandings are always good for a cheap laugh. I know that it's usually the female that usually is the one who comes out of the bathroom in a towel. I guess it would be too much for a man to do. Anyways, Professor King arrives, and he and Stevens start to have a conversation, and we finally get to learn something about what the heck's going on around here.
Accidents. There's a shaft of light coming up out of the ocean. I have reason to believe that it's nuclear in character. Now, any object coming in contact with this light would be subject to extreme radiation. I believe this light killed 3 men. I'd like to. It was being guarded by a sea serpent. A hideous beast that defies description.
No, Doctor, if I didn't know that you were a scientist of high standards, I'd say that you were the victim of the ridiculous phantom stories that are running wild around the village.
I proved it could be done. I used artificial means to start the reaction.
Then you think that with the submerged deposit of uranium ore, you can get the same reaction on a much larger scale.
A weapon like this could destroy anything coming in contact with it.
Isn't it, Doctor?
Yes. And if what I believe is true, this monster that I saw in the ocean was a mutation of some sea creature. You see, it draws its energy from the nuclear light itself, just as plant life needs the sun to grow on. However, there's another element.
Another element?
The person responsible for this terrible weapon has offered it for sale to the highest bidder.
For sale?
It was a pretty long conversation, but those are the highlights. Now, Dr. King is not the one trying to sell it. He suspects either George or Ethel, obviously. We learn it's more than likely George, because he meets his contact, Wanda.
They've got federal men investigating. They must know something. They're planning on making a dive tomorrow.
A dive? They've got to be stopped.
How?
That's your problem. I got a cable from Antwerp. I'm to fly there in 2 days. They're expecting me to bring some vital information from you.
I'm not ready.
You were ready enough to accept a considerable sum of money in advance, weren't you?
I won't know anything until I can get into King's lab.
Well, George is told he's got 2 days in which to figure out how to get into that lab. Oh, and as for the diving equipment that Grant, and it turns out Stevens will be using, George figures out something on that one. Meanwhile, Grant has been contacted by Ethel, and they meet at a roadhouse, where we learn what Ethel has against Dr. King.
He may fool the rest of you with his soft voice, but not me. He's a killer.
You can't accuse King of treason just because you hate him.
I'll accuse him of anything. He sent my only son out in a squall to get his filthy ocean specimens.
Well, Grant concocts a way of Ethel making a set of keys using wax impressions, and then she can get into the lab, or he could get into the lab, to find the proof they need for Ethel's accusations. Unfortunately, when they're leaving, it seemed someone had overheard them.
I could.
Come on.
At this point, we get one of the funniest lines in this whole film.
Lovely.
Thank you. I hope my caller feels the same way about it.
I'm sure he will. Dr. Stevens is very observing. He's a bright young man.
Yes. A man who's only about 3 years younger than Dr. King is a bright young man. Obviously, the part as originally written was for a younger actor, but they cast Kent Taylor, who's like 50 at this point in his career. I guess shaving off his signature mustache, they felt, would make him look younger, even though you constantly see his neck wrinkles. Anyways, he shows up and they go for a romantic walk on the beach. Meanwhile, a young couple has decided to go a little night diving with the expected bad results. So, of course, Ted and Lois find the bodies of the young couple, and somebody else was observing them. Of course, George gets away. Later, at the hospital, we learn a little bit more information about Ted Stevens.
Earlier today, I had a long talk with Washington. You were the topic of conversation.
Am I to be shot at sunrise?
They told me to cooperate with you. You could have floored me. They put you on this case, too, and didn't even tell me about it.
I thought they would eventually. Apparently, they wanted two completely indifferent investigations of this. One from a scientific point of view and one from a
gumshoe, government style?
Now that they're working together, they both go out to make the dive, where George's sabotage doesn't quite go as planned. Fixing the sabotage, i.e. taking those capsules out and tossing them, they proceed to make their dive, where Grant finds out that spear guns don't really work that well against mutated, I don't know what it is, seahorse or whatever it is. Meanwhile, Wanda tells George that Ethel met with Grant. Ethel, of course, is very upset. She tells George that Grant is lying. George, of course, is very upset. She tells George that Ethel met with Grant. Meanwhile, Wanda tells George that Ethel met with Grant. George, of course, is very upset. She tells George that Ethel met with Grant. So, while she's walking along the beach, George makes an impossible shot in which he shoots her from the side and hits her in the back. King gets accused of the killing because Ethel had been trying to get into his lab. Meanwhile, Ted talks to King, saying they have to destroy this creature. It's just too dangerous. And King asks for time to make a decision. It's difficult. And then something happens, and all decisions are mute at that point. Faced with all of these deaths now in his conscience, Dr. King decides everything must be destroyed. When the janitor comes in, he sees something he wished he hadn't.
What in the world is that? Do you mean to say that's one of God's creatures, Professor?
No, Andy, that's one of man's follies, and I pray God there'll never be another one.
Grabbing a case that's suspiciously heavy, the professor leaves. Meanwhile, George goes to meet his contact.
On your feet.
Figured you'd show up here sooner or later. What do you want of me?
Just a confession to Ethel Hall's murder.
We found a spear gun in your car. Ballistic tests and fingerprints pretty well tie you into it, mister. You weren't very clever about it.
Yep. Apparently they tracked down Wanda earlier and captured her, and just waited for George to show up. With George in custody, Grant joins Ted and Lois, and they head over to her father's lab, find the destruction, and try to figure out where he might have gone. Ted thinks he knows, and they head for the beach. As usual, Ted was right. And thus, with the monster, the radiation beam, and the creator all destroyed, Ted gets to sum it all up for us.
You know he meant this power to be used to help humanity, not destroy it.
I'm sure he did. And he paid for his mistake. Nature has many secrets that man mustn't disturb. And this was one of them.
He tampered in God's domain. Couldn't resist. Look who's back. You didn't bring anything with you, did you? Okay. This is kind of an okay film. Not a lot of action. It's very talky, as a lot of low-budget 50s sci-fi horror films were. The problem being, the conversations just kind of loop around each other. We get the same information over and over again. And it's just, it drags. Same with the underwater scenes. There's a lot of shots of them swimming and swimming and swimming. And then, the monster. And then they go up. The two attacks are okay, and there's some nice long shots of the monster. It's kind kind of an interesting looking creature. I do like at the end when it's fighting with Dr. King and you could see the stunt woman's hands coming out of the gloves. Yeah, go back and check it. It's pretty funny. The acting's okay. Ken Taylor had been a popular actor in the 30s, early 40s, but at this point his career was kind of on the downside. He would later go on to appear in the Crawling Hand, and it's a little bit of a better film, and he gives a better performance. This one, it's just a little too hammy, I guess you'd say. He's trying a little too hard to be the mysterious investigator and the youthful lover. But, you know, back then it was no big deal for a man that age to be dating a woman 20 years younger than him. You know, that was a big thing throughout a lot of history, because an older man would be more financially secure. And so, good match for marriage, you know, you have children, da-da-da-da-da. But for a 50s movie, of course, that would be different come American International, when they finally got formed completely, and they would do a lot of teenage horror, hot rod movies and things, because the drive-in audience was teenagers. So who better to have starring in your films than teenagers? But as I said, it's an okay film, a little talky. And it's not very well shot, to be honest. You needed someone like Roger Corman or Burt I. Gordon, someone who understood he's working on a low budget and needs to do things now and then with their setups to make it at least interesting looking. But these are all dead-on straight shots. No interesting angles. No staging. I mean, if you've ever seen some of Corman's cheaper films, he'll put on a straight shot, but then he'll stage the actors to move while they're talking, so that there does seem to be some action going on, and it doesn't feel so static. But, yeah, not the best, but not the worst either. It's just sort of a meh kind of film. Please hit like, share, and subscribe. And as always, stay after the credits for my favorite scene.